We often think of ghosts as spirits of the dead, pale, translucent things that haunt the attics of old houses. But we are mistaken. The true ghosts of our civilization are not made of ectoplasm or soul mist. They are made of polymers. They are bright, colorful, and smooth to the touch. We have summoned a demon that we cannot banish, a material that was designed to defy the very laws of decay that govern the universe. We wanted to play God, to create something that time could not touch, and we succeeded. We created the immortal corpse. Look around you right now, in the room where you sit. How many surfaces are synthetic? The casing of your phone, the buttons on your remote, the fibers of the carpet beneath your feet. We live inside a shell of our own making, a world wrapped in a skin that will never rot. This is the story of that skin. It is not a story of boring chemistry or industrial manufacturing. It is a tragedy in 3 acts: the seduction, the addiction, and the suffocation. To understand the birth of this immortal material, we must first travel back to a world that was entirely organic, a world where everything you touched had once been alive: wood, wool, leather, bone. It is the mid-19th century. The year is 1863. The setting is not a laboratory, but a dimly lit, smoke-filled billiards parlor in New York City. The air is thick with the smell of stale tobacco and cheap whiskey. Men in waistcoats lean over green felt tables, their faces illuminated by the flickering gaslight. Listen to the sound. Click, clack. The sharp, resonant percussion of billiard balls colliding. It is the sound of luxury. It is the sound of leisure. But if you listen closely, underneath that satisfying click, you can hear the scream of a dying giant. Every single one of those perfect, creamy white spheres on the table was carved from the tusk of an elephant. The game of billiards had become an obsession for the aristocracy and the rising middle class of the West, and the demand for ivory was insatiable. They called it white gold. Travel now to the savannas of Africa. The heat is oppressive, distorting the horizon in shimmering waves. The silence of the plains is broken by the thunderous crack of a heavy-bore rifle. A bull elephant, a creature that has walked the earth for 50 years, stumbles. The ground shakes as 6 tons of muscle and bone collapse into the red dust. The hunters do not care about the majesty of the beast. They do not care about the matriarchal bonds of the herd. They care only for the teeth. They hack the tusks from the skull with brutal efficiency, leaving the mountain of flesh to the vultures. To produce a single set of high-quality billiard balls, one elephant had to die. Just 3 balls could be carved from the finest part of a tusk. The math was horrifying. As the popularity of the game exploded in London, Paris, and New York, the population of elephants plummeted. The supply chain was breaking. The price of ivory skyrocketed. The billiard industry was facing a crisis of existence. They were running out of death to carve. The panic was palpable. A major billiard supplier, Phelan and Calendar, issued a desperate challenge. They placed an advertisement in the newspapers offering a staggering fortune, $10, 00 in gold, to any inventor who could create a substitute for ivory. They needed a material that was hard, dense, and perfectly smooth. They needed a miracle. Enter the garage of John Wesley Hyatt. Hyatt was not a trained chemist. He was a tinkerer, a printer by trade, a man with calloused hands and a mind that refused to accept impossible odds. He saw the advertisement, and he saw a future where he was a rich man. He began to experiment in a makeshift workshop in Albany, New York. It was a dangerous place. The shelves were lined with jars of solvents and acids. The air smelled of camphor, a pungent, medicinal scent derived from laurel trees, and something sharper, more acrid. Hyatt was playing with fire. He was experimenting with nitrocellulose. This substance was made by treating cotton fibers with nitric and sulfuric acid. In a different form, it was known as gun cotton. It was an explosive. Imagine him there, late at night, his face smeared with soot, mixing the volatile cotton pulp with camphor under high heat and pressure. He was trying to tame an explosive, to freeze it into a solid form, and one day he succeeded. He opened his mold and out fell a ball. It wasn't bone, it wasn't wood, it was something new. He called it celluloid. It was the first semi-synthetic plastic. It could be molded into any shape. It was smooth. It could be dyed to look like ivory or tortoiseshell or coral. It was a revolution. Hyatt began manufacturing billiard balls from this new material. The elephants, for a moment, were spared. But celluloid had a flaw. It remembered its violent origins. Picture a saloon in the Wild West, Colorado perhaps. Men are drinking, playing a high-stakes game of billiards with Hyatt's new celluloid balls. One player strikes the cue ball with immense force. It rockets across the felt and slams into the 8-ball. Crack. The sound is not a click, it is a detonation, a small explosion. The impact has ignited the unstable nitrocellulose within the sphere. Silence falls over the saloon. Every man in the room instantly reaches for his holster, drawing his revolver, eyes darting to the shadows, looking for the assassin. The bartender ducks behind the wood, but there is no gunman. There is only the billiard ball, slightly scorched, spinning on the table. John Wesley Hyatt himself later received a letter from a saloon owner in Colorado. The letter complained that while the balls were excellent for playing, every time they collided with a loud report, every man in the room drew his gun, which was bad for business. Celluloid was a miracle, yes, but it was a volatile one. It yellowed with age. It was highly flammable. Film reels made of celluloid would later burn down entire cinemas in seconds. It was an imitation of nature, but it was not yet a master of it. The world needed something more stable, something that did not just mimic the old world, but replaced it entirely. We move forward in time. The year is 1907. The Victorian era has faded, and the industrial age is roaring. We find ourselves in Yonkers, New York, in the backyard laboratory of a Belgian genius named Leo Baekeland. Baekeland is already a wealthy man, having invented photographic paper, but he is obsessed with a new problem. He is looking for a synthetic substitute for shellac, the secretion of the lac beetle used to varnish wood. The beetles, like the elephants, could not keep up with human demand. Baekeland is not a tinkerer like Hyatt. He is a scientist of the highest order. He is an alchemist of the carbon atom. Step into his lab, it is hot. In the center of the room sits a heavy iron vessel, a terrifying pressure cooker he calls the Bakerizer. Baekeland is experimenting with two cheap, abundant chemicals: phenol, a waste product from coal tar, and formaldehyde, a preservative used for corpses. He mixes them. The smell is chemical and harsh, the scent of a hospital morgue mixed with burning tar. He pours the mixture into the Bakerizer and subjects it to immense heat and crushing pressure. He is forcing the molecules to dance, to link arms in a three-dimensional lattice that nature never intended to create. He opens the vessel. Inside there is no explosion, there is no brittle imitation of ivory. There is a dark, amber-colored resin. It is hard as stone. It does not melt. You can heat it until it chars, but it will never turn back into a liquid. It is resistant to electricity. It is resistant to acid. It is resistant to time itself. He calls it Bakelite. This was the moment the world changed. This was the birth of the first fully synthetic plastic. It contained no molecules found in living organisms. It was entirely alien. Baekeland called it the material of 1,000 uses, and he was not exaggerating. Suddenly the constraints of nature were gone. Designers were no longer limited by the grain of wood or the fragility of glass. Bakelite could be molded into the sleek, curved black shapes of the telephone. It formed the casing of the radio, bringing the voices of the world into the living room. It became the dashboard of the automobile. It became the jewelry of the flapper era, Art Deco bangles that clattered on the wrists of women dancing the Charleston. It was celebrated as a triumph of human will. We had surpassed the Creator. We had made a substance that was immune to the rot and decay that claimed everything else. We looked at this dark, shiny, hard material, and we saw the future. We saw freedom from scarcity. We did not look far enough to see the mountains of waste. We did not see the islands of trash. We did not see the microplastics entering the blood of the unborn. We only saw the shine. We only saw the miracle. And like children playing with a new toy, we wanted more. We wanted it to be softer, clearer, cheaper. We wanted it to be everywhere. And so the age of the alchemist ended, and the age of the industrial giant began. The world was now primed for a new kind of magic. Bakelite had proven that we could create hard, durable objects from sludge, but the human heart desires something else. We desire softness. We desire the feeling of luxury against the skin. For centuries, the pinnacle of this sensation was silk. It was spun by worms imported on slow ships from the east, fragile, expensive, and reserved for the elite. Enter the tragedy of Wallace Carruthers. He was a brilliant, melancholic chemist working for DuPont. He battled deep depression, carrying a capsule of cyanide in his pocket as a dark comfort, while in his beaker he brewed a miracle. He pulled a fiber from a test tube that stretched and did not break. He called it Fiber 66. The world would know it as nylon. It is October 24th, 1939, Wilmington, Delaware. The air is crisp with autumn leaves, but the atmosphere on the street is electric, bordering on violent. 4,000 women are lined up outside a department store. They are not there for bread. They are not there for gold. They are there for stockings. Until this moment, stockings bagged at the knees. They ran. They tore. But nylon. Nylon was advertised as being as strong as steel, as fine as spider's web. When the doors opened, the civility of the mid-century collapsed. It was the nylon riots. Picture the scene. Gloved hands clawing at counters. The polite murmur of society ladies turning into the shrill cries of predators. In San Francisco, a crowd of 10,000 women stormed a store that had only a few hundred pairs. Windows were smashed. Police were called to beat back the frenzy with batons. Why such hysteria? Because for the first time, the synthetic was not just a cheap substitute for the natural. It was better than the natural. It was smoother. It was sheerer. It was a second skin that never sagged. When a woman pulled those stockings up her legs, she was not just wearing a garment. She was wearing the future. She was sheathing herself in petroleum. The silkworm had been made obsolete by the oil derrick. But the joy of the new skin was short-lived. The world darkened. The lights of Europe went out. War consumed the globe. And here, plastic found its true calling. It became the war hero. When the Japanese Empire seized the rubber plantations of Southeast Asia, the Allied war machine threatened to grind to a halt. The military needed materials. They turned to the chemists. The production of plastic did not just increase, it exploded, growing by 300% almost overnight. Imagine you were a tail gunner in a B-17 Flying Fortress, cruising at 30,000 feet over Germany. The air outside is 50 degrees below zero. The wind screams like a banshee. Between your eyes and the freezing void, there is only a thin, curved sheet of material. It is clear as glass, but it does not shatter when a bullet grazes it. It is plexiglass, acrylic. Down below in the mud of the Pacific Islands, a soldier trudges through the monsoon rain. He is wearing a poncho that is light, waterproof, and doesn't rot in the humidity. It is vinyl. High above Normandy, thousands of paratroopers jump into the darkness. The canopies that snap open above their heads, slowing their descent, catching the wind that saves their lives, they are not silk. They are nylon. The soldier learned to trust plastic. He gripped a plastic handle on his knife. He looked through plastic binoculars. He drank water from a plastic canteen. By the time the guns fell silent in 1945, a generation of men had returned home with a subconscious lesson etched into their minds. Plastic is safety. Plastic is victory. Plastic is modern. The war ended, but the factories did not stop. The massive industrial machine that had been churning out polymers for the military suddenly had no enemy to fight. They had to find a new target. They targeted the American housewife. It is 1955. The sun is shining on a manicured lawn. Inside a suburban home, a photographer from Life magazine is setting up a shot that will define an era. The article is titled "Throwaway Living." The image is ecstatic. A father, mother, and daughter are standing with their arms raised to the heavens, smiling broadly. Frozen in the air around them, suspended by invisible wires, is a storm of objects: paper plates, plastic forks, cups, napkins, raincoats, dog dishes. The caption promises a new kind of liberation. It calculates that cleaning these items would take 40 hours of a housewife's time. No housewife need bother, the magazine declares. The act of tossing a plate into the trash was no longer wasteful. It was virtuous. It was an act of freedom. Hear the clatter of that plastic fork hitting the bottom of the metal trash can. That sound was the bell tolling for the age of thrift. For thousands of years, humans had mended, washed, and reused. Now we were taught that the greatest luxury was to use something once, for 5 minutes, and then banish it from existence. We were taught to create garbage. We learned to love the sensation of the fresh package, the crinkle of the wrapper, the pristine surface that no one had ever touched before, and no one would ever touch again. But while some plastics were destined for the bin, others were becoming the new family heirlooms. Travel to a living room in Orlando, Florida. It is evening. The room is filled with women in floral dresses, balancing cigarettes and cocktails. In the center of the room stands a woman who looks like a movie star, Brownie Wise. She is not selling a product. She is leading a congregation. She holds up a translucent pastel-colored bowl. It is polyethylene, soft, waxy, cloudy. She places the lid on the bowl. She asks the room to be silent. She presses her thumb into the center of the lid and lifts the tab slightly. The Tupperware burp. The women gasp. It is a magic trick. Brownie Wise tells them that this sound is the sound of freshness being locked in, and the air, the agent of decay, being forced out. This was the Tupperware gospel. Before this, food rotted quickly. Bread went stale. Cheese molded. But inside this plastic sarcophagus, the food stayed alive. Brownie Wise didn't just sell bowls, she sold a vision of a perfectly ordered life. She threw Tupperware filled with water across the room to prove it wouldn't spill. She turned plastic into a status symbol. If your pantry was stacked with these colorful, matching, airtight containers, you were a good mother. You were a modern woman. Tupperware parties swept the nation. Women who had been pushed back into the kitchen after the war found a way to make their own money selling plastic to their neighbors. The material became woven into the social fabric of the neighborhood. It was clean, it was orderly, it was permanent. Those bowls, bought in 1950, are still sitting in cupboards today. They have not decomposed. They have not rusted. They are waiting. The potato salad is long gone, but the vessel remains, a pastel monument to a time when we thought we could seal off the world and keep everything fresh forever. By the 1970s, the dream began to sour. The landfills were rising. The roadside ditches were glittering with the refuse of the throwaway living era. The public was waking up from the trance, and they were angry. They looked at the mountains of trash and they pointed their fingers at the manufacturers. The industry faced a nightmare, the threat of government bans. So they created a sigil, a rune of protection. Traveled to a design competition in 1970, a 23-year-old student named Gary Anderson draws a simple shape, 3 arrows, twisting and folding into themselves, chasing each other in an infinite loop. The Mobius strip. It represented a cycle, creation, use, and renewal. But the industry took this symbol and they weaponized it. They did not put it only on things that were being recycled. They put it on everything. Look closely at the bottom of a plastic bottle. You see the triangle. You feel a wave of relief. You think, this is recyclable. If I put this in the blue bin, it will become a new bottle. I am doing my part. Well, this is the lie of the arrows. Zoom in on the number inside the triangle. If it is a 1 or a 2, perhaps there is hope. But if it is a 3, a 6, or a 7, the triangle is a lie. It is not a promise of recycling. It is merely a resin identification code. It tells the sorting machine what kind of chemical poison it is dealing with. The industry spent millions lobbying to make this symbol mandatory. Why? Because it shifted the guilt. When you see the arrows, you do not see waste. You see potential. You feel permission to consume. You toss the container into the bin and you wash your hands of the sin. You do not see the reality that for decades, less than 10% of all plastic ever made has actually been recycled. The rest? It went to the incinerator to become toxic smoke, or it went to the earth to wait out the next millennium. The arrows were not a cycle. They were a one-way street leading off a cliff. But the psychological warfare did not end with a symbol. It needed a face. It needed a tear. It is Earth Day, 1971. A television flickers in a darkened living room. The static clears and a commercial begins. We see a canoe paddling through a mist-shrouded river. The water is choked with industrial sludge. The man in the canoe is a Native American, dressed in buckskin, a feather in his hair. He paddles his way into a modern city where smokestacks belch black fumes. He pulls his canoe onto a shore littered with fast food wrappers and newspapers. He stands by a highway. A car speeds past, and a bag of trash is flung from the window, exploding at his feet. The camera zooms in on his face. He looks into the lens. A single, perfect tear rolls down his cheek. The narrator speaks in a deep, shaming voice. People start pollution. People can stop it. This was the Crying Indian. So it is one of the most famous commercials in history. It convinced a generation that pollution was a moral failing of the individual. If only you didn't litter, the world would be green. But look behind the curtain. Who paid for this ad? It was an organization called Keep America Beautiful. And who funded Keep America Beautiful? It was not the Sierra Club. It was the American Can Company, the Owens Illinois Glass Company, Coca-Cola, Dixie Cup. The tears were fake. Even the Indian was fake. The actor was Iron Eyes Cody. He was not Cherokee or Cree. He was Espera Oscar de Corti, the son of Sicilian immigrants from southern Italy. He had built a career playing a caricature. The corporations had pulled off a masterstroke. By blaming the litter bug, they successfully distracted the world from the real problem, the production of single-use disposable packaging. They made you look at the trash on the ground so you wouldn't look at the factory pumping it out. But the trash didn't just stay on the ground, it migrated. It sought the lowest point. It sought the ocean. Fast forward to 1997, we are far from land, in the most desolate stretch of the North Pacific Ocean. It is a place sailors avoid, the North Pacific Gyre, a high-pressure system where the winds die and the currents swirl in a massive, slow vortex. Captain Charles Moore is sailing his catamaran, the Algeta, home to California from Hawaii. He decides to take a shortcut through the Gyre. He expects a pristine blue wilderness. He expects the emptiness of the deep sea. Instead, he finds a soup. Day after day, for a week, Moore stands on the deck, looking down. There is no clear water. Every time he looks, he sees floating confetti, a bottle cap here, a crate, fragment there, a ghostly white shopping bag drifting like a jellyfish. He is traversing the great Pacific garbage patch. It is not a solid island that you can walk on. That would be too easy to understand. It is more insidious. It is a nebulous cloud of debris, twice the size of Texas, suspending in the water column. It is a plastic smog. Moore watches in horror as his boat cuts through the waste of civilization, thousands of miles from the nearest supermarket. He realizes that the ocean has become a global toilet bowl that never flushes. But surely there must be somewhere safe, somewhere remote enough that our touch hasn't reached it. Let us travel to the end of the world, Henderson Island. It is a tiny, uninhabited coral atoll in the South Pacific, one of the Pitcairn Islands. It is over 3,000 miles away from the nearest major population center. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a sanctuary for rare birds and nesting turtles. Walk onto the beach at Henderson Island. The sun is tropical and bright. The sand should be white coral dust, but the sand is buried. It looks like the aftermath of a shipwreck or the floor of a recycling center after a hurricane. On this uninhabited island, researchers found 38 million pieces of plastic. Look closer at the horror of the details. Here is a toy soldier from the 1980s, its face eroded by the waves. Here is a prescription pill bottle from Japan. Here is a fishing buoy from Chile, and there. Look at the movement in the sand. A hermit crab scuttles across the drift line, but it is not wearing a shell. It has made its home inside the severed head of a plastic doll. Another crab drags a blue bottle cap as its armor. The tragedy of Henderson Island is the final proof that there is no away. When you threw that bottle away in 1995, this is where it went. We have colonized the uninhabited places of the earth, not with our bodies, but with our refuse. The ocean has vomited our sins back onto the shore, and the crabs are wearing them. Consider the object you likely have within arm's reach, the single-use water bottle. It is a marvel of engineering, clear as crystal, light as a feather, yet strong enough to survive a fall from a skyscraper. It is made of polyethylene terephthalate, PET. Hold it in your mind. It is a hot afternoon in July. You are thirsty. You buy the bottle for $1. You crack the seal, that satisfying snap of the tamper-proof ring. You tilt your head back. The cool liquid rushes down your throat. The experience lasts perhaps 3 minutes. The relief is instantaneous. You crush the thin plastic in your hand, crinkle, crack, and you toss it into a bin. The transaction is complete. You are hydrated. The bottle is gone, but the bottle is not gone. The chemistry of that bottle is built on the carbon-carbon bond, one of the strongest forces in the universe. Nature has bacteria that can eat wood, fungi that can digest bone, and acids that can dissolve stone. But nature has no tool in its billion-year-old kit that knows how to unlock the fortress of the PET molecule. It is alien to the digestive enzymes of the earth. If a thirsty peasant in the year 1500 had drunk from a plastic bottle and tossed it into a ditch, that bottle would still be there today, sitting in the mud, perfectly intact, waiting for you to dig it up. That bottle you just threw away will persist for 450 years. It will outlive you. It will outlive your children. It will outlive your great-grandchildren. It will sit in the dark silence of a landfill, compressed under tons of other debris, unchanging, immortal, a ghost that refuses to pass on. We are building pyramids of trash that will stand longer than the monuments of the pharaohs, but there is no gold inside, only the empty vessels of our momentary thirst. For decades, we told ourselves a comforting lie about where these bottles went. We put them in the blue bin. We saw the truck take them away. We thought they were being melted down and reborn in a clean green cycle. But the reality was a global shipping route of shame. We travel now to the bustling ports of eastern China. It is 2017. Massive container ships, the leviathans of global trade, are docking. They are not unloading electronics or silk. They are unloading the West's refuse. For 30 years, the United States, Europe, and Australia shipped nearly half of the world's recyclable waste to China. It was cheaper to ship it across the ocean than to deal with it at home. China was the world's garbage dump. Villagers in rural areas would sort through mountains of dirty American plastic, breathing in toxic fumes as they melted it down in crude backyard workshops to recover the raw resin. It was a dirty, poisonous business, but it kept the West feeling clean. Then came the shock. January the 1st, 2018, the government of China enacted a policy with a name that sounded like a military strike, Operation National Sword. The decree was simple and brutal, no more. China would no longer accept yang laji, foreign garbage. They set purity standards so high that 99% of Western recycling could not meet them. The doors slammed shut. In ports from Los Angeles to Rotterdam, the panic was immediate. Bales of plastic piled up on the docks, festering in the sun. The illusion was shattered. Without China to hide our mess, the recycling centers of the West admitted the truth. They couldn't handle it. The economics didn't work. Cities that had proudly touted their green credentials quietly started sending the contents of their blue recycling bins straight to the incinerators or the landfills. We weren't recycling. We were just moving the pile around, and now the pile had nowhere to go. But while the mountains of trash are visible, the true horror is what happens when the plastic begins to vanish. We have a misconception about decay. We think that when something breaks, it goes away, but plastic does not biodegrade. It does not return to the soil to feed the worms. It photodegrades. Go to a beach, find a piece of plastic that has been there for years, a crate, perhaps. Touch it. It crumbles into a fine powder. This is the work of the sun. The ultraviolet rays act like millions of tiny hammers, smashing the polymer chains, chopping them into smaller and smaller pieces. It doesn't become dirt, it becomes dust. This is the microscopic invasion. The plastic is turning into microplastics, particles smaller than a grain of rice, smaller than a grain of sand, smaller than a red blood cell. It is becoming invisible. It sinks into the sand on the beach. You walk on it and you think you are walking on nature, but you are walking on a synthetic matrix. It mixes with the soil in the fields. It enters the roots of the crops. The earth itself is becoming a polymer blend, and once it becomes dust, it becomes free. It is no longer bound by gravity. It can fly. We climb now, high into the thin air. We are in the Pyrenees Mountains on the border of France and Spain. It is a place of pristine beauty, far from the smog of the cities. The snow is white and blinding. A scientist sets up a collector to catch the falling snow. She melts it and looks under a microscope. She expects to see pollen, or perhaps dust from the Sahara. Instead, she sees a kaleidoscope of neon colors, bright red fragments, electric blue fibers, fluorescent green shards. It is raining plastic, The microplastics are so light that they have been swept up into the atmosphere. They are caught in the jet streams. They are part of the water cycle now. They evaporate with the ocean mist, form clouds and fall as rain and snow. They have been found in the deepest trenches of the Mariana. They have been found in the pristine ice of Antarctica. They have been found in the cleanest air of the Tasmanian wilderness. There is no shelter. You can hike to the most remote peak, breathe the air that feels cold and sharp in your lungs, and you are inhaling the dust of a shopping bag that was discarded in a city 3,000 miles away. The sky is no longer a ceiling, it is a conveyor belt of debris. We have fundamentally altered the chemistry of the atmosphere. We made it rain our own refuse.